Boy, oh boy, what a hell of a Super Rugby Grand Final. Morning after, jubilation for the Crusaders and tears for the Chiefs, but that's sport and a hell of a game of rugby, wasn't it, guys? 19 weeks of Super Rugby coming to an end. How good. Guys, in this video, my review, I'm going to cover off three main areas. So I'll cover off, firstly, a review of the first and second halves. I'll give you my thoughts on what I think went wrong, so horribly wrong for the Chiefs. Some interesting thoughts there. And then finally, I'll give you a bit of an analysis of some of the players or potential All Black bolters from that massive Super Rugby Grand Final. Boy, oh boy. So I think firstly we look at the game down in Christchurch. It was always going to be tough for the Chiefs going down to Canterbury to beat them in front of their home crowd. Die-hard supporters and a hell of a legacy that Crusaders rugby side has. I think firstly you look at that first half and look that the first 10 minutes, boy oh boy, the speed and intensity was ferocious, wasn't it? And particularly you just saw in, I think it was about 5 minutes in, Tupu Vai just waving out to his Chiefs players, just slow down and calm down a bit, guys. So that was pretty fascinating to see. And then obviously a big interesting moment, yellow card for David Havili, and then the Chiefs went down the other end and geez, they put through a hell of a lot of phases, didn't they? And then obviously a try to Ollie Norris. The defence from both sides was phenomenal. Then the Crusaders went down the other end, and particularly that rolling maul. I thought that was quite a big moment in the game, guys. Let me know your thoughts on that, particularly that rolling maul. Cody Taylor just goes straight through the middle, and unfortunately, Cortez Ratama at the back of the rolling maul just caught napping a little bit, so he'd be pretty disappointed with that. He should have been on it, watching, and he would have been the man to tackle Cody Taylor, but obviously, the Crusaders respond with a good try to Cody Taylor and then a couple of good field goals to Rugby Reihana. And, at that point, it's looking quite comfortable for the Crusaders heading towards halftime. Then, look, the Chiefs fired some shots down the other end. Jeepers, that number of phases, some brutal defence from the Crusaders, but a pretty good try to Sean Stevenson in the corner. Halftime score 13-12 to the Crusaders. So yeah, look, at that point I thought, geez, this is going to go down to the wire, and the team that basically scores next in the second half will win the game. Guys, if you're enjoying the content, hit the like button, show some support for the channel, hit the subscribe button. Plenty more coming into All Black season. There's going to be plenty of cracking videos to come out, and look, I can't wait for the international rugby season coming up. So yeah, looking at that second half, look, it was quite an interesting sort of second half, and guys, let me know your thoughts on the second half down below. I really thought that the Chiefs would have come out and fired some shots, maybe scored another try or two in the second half, and maybe the Crusaders would have scored another try, and it would have been pretty close. But yeah, ultimately the second half seemed to be dominated by defence. The Chiefs could not get their attack going remotely at all, and that Crusaders defence just went up a level. They were just absolutely possessed. They were phenomenal. The line speed, the power they brought, just shutting down any space for that Chiefs attack. And ultimately, the other thing I have was the four players really, the Damien McKenzie, Sean Stevenson kicking duo from them versus Rugby Reihana and Will Jordan. And I think if you were honest, I think the Crusaders well won that kicking battle, didn't they? Hard to sort of understand why, but particularly I think the aerial battle, like Will Jordan, he took a number of phenomenal high balls, and the same with Rugby Reihana, he took a good one at the end, and I just think that the Chiefs weren't as good under the high ball, and that let the Crusaders win the territory. But yeah, it was a real dogfight, wasn't it, that second half? And then ultimately that field goal to take it to 16-13 to the Crusaders really put some heat on the Chiefs, meaning they needed to score a try, and the pressure really came on the Chiefs, and the Crusaders defence just went up another level. Yeah, so look, again, congratulations to the Crusaders and their supporters. They're a hell hell of a franchise, a hell of a legacy. You know, the most successful rugby franchise by far in New Zealand rugby and Super Rugby. You know, phenomenal side. And the other side, I really did feel for Clayton McMillan and that Chiefs franchise. They're also a hell of a rugby franchise. They leave their heart on their sleeves as well. And yeah, but you know, there's only one winner in the grand final. And look, ultimately that takes the Crusaders to 32 home finals now won. That is a phenomenal legacy, and 13 Super Rugby titles. Again, absolutely phenomenal. So again, a hell of a rugby franchise the Crusaders are. I think my next question, what went so horribly wrong for the Chiefs? And guys, let me know your thoughts on that down below. I think the first thing I'd say is their attack. Like, guys, I honestly think what I've seen of the Chiefs in weeks gone by, I think if the Chiefs had been 90% of what they're absolutely capable of on attack, I think they would have won the game quite comfortably. I think they would have scored at least another 2 or 3 tries, and yeah, definitely won it quite comfortably. The Crusaders defense wouldn't have been able to hold them. But again, there was a couple of issues with their attack. You know, their ruck speed I thought was slow. I thought their game management, so I questioned some of Damien McKenzie's game management there. It didn't seem to be the leadership, the game management, looking for space, adapting it against that Crusaders defence. I thought that their power and physicality up the middle was strong, but they had the power up the middle, but they lacked variety on attack. You know, whether or not they're picking and going or short balls or going the blind side, they didn't have that variety to really test the Crusaders, which they're capable of. So, look, they'll be absolutely gutted about that. And look, as I said before, I just think, unfortunately, that second half went horribly wrong for them. They sort of went into their shell a little bit. And the Crusaders are always going to win the tight games, the dog fights, the territory battles, keeping it tight. Defense wins the game, but that was never going to win the game for the Chiefs. And they went into their shells. And I don't know why. I think they'll have to have a look at that, but certainly the second half, the Chiefs needed to come out. They needed to spin the ball and attack when it was on far more, shift it into space, and really take the Crusaders on and not take them on at the territory type game. You know, it's something for Clayton McMillan and the coaching staff, but yeah, really tough pill to swallow for the Chiefs. And look, you got to say the Crusaders were phenomenal in the territory and defence, and ultimately that was a large factor as to why they won this grand final. Finally, the All Black bolters and key players from the match. Look, the first one I've got to say is Rugby Reihana for the Crusaders. Previous games, he'd been solid, but, you know, a young player, huge pressure. This is a season on the line. You don't get more pressure than this at Super Rugby level. And look, his composure for a young first five was phenomenal. I thought his kicking was particularly good. He found space, his long-range kicking was particularly accurate. And again, his game management for a young guy was particularly good. He led the forward pack well, he led that Crusaders backline well, you know, and his defence was solid. Yeah, a very, very good game and a big Super Rugby final for him. So I think he's definitely a player to watch. I don't think he'll be named in the All Blacks probably this year anyway, but certainly a potential All Black bolter for next year and years beyond. You know, potentially the replacement to Damien McKenzie, Bowden Barrett at fly half for future years, guys. So let me know your thoughts on him down below. Will Jordan, look, he was phenomenal, wasn't he? You know, massive game, massive pressure, and look, he's a true competitor, isn't he? He really stepped up. And certainly the game style didn't suit him. It wasn't fast and expansive, but you know, a number of times Will Jordan, he's not a big man, but he'd carry the ball at speed, hard lines, you know, and particularly his leadership. He was guiding that back line, talking with Rugby Reihana about what to do, and particularly I think was significant was his work with the high ball. Like, he was phenomenal. There was a number of real dangerous bombs put up for him, but he handled them with actually quite a lot of ease in the end. So phenomenal game to Will Jordan. Damian McKenzie, let me know your thoughts on him down below, guys. Look, I think he played well overall. I think he kicked well. I think his defense was solid. But yeah, I mean, maybe this is harsh, but the one real question I have to ask about him was his game management. And particularly for the experience Damian McKenzie has, the amount of test matches he's played as an All Black at the level above. He's played at World Cups before. You know, I really don't know that his game management was up to scratch for the Chiefs. You know, particularly the leadership. You know, don't get me wrong, it was phenomenal line speed and Crusaders defense up against the Chiefs, but it just felt like in that second half that the Chiefs didn't seem to adapt. They didn't seem to have a plan B or be communicating with the forwards or the backs to create space to change it up a little bit on attack. There was a real lack of variety on attack, and you know, ultimately that's not completely him. Maybe this was the directive a bit from the coaching staff, but yeah, the reality is the fly half is responsible largely for the game management on attack, and yeah, I just don't know that he quite did his job as well as he could have. So again, let me know your thoughts on that down below. Tough pill for him to swallow as well. I'm sure he would have really loved to win the grand final, but it wasn't to be. So finally, guys, congrats to the Crusaders for winning the Super Rugby in 2025. A hell of a grand final. I've said to my mate at the pub, I said this is probably the most brutal, intense Super Rugby game I've ever seen. So yeah, phenomenal rugby, and yeah, won by the Crusaders for 2025. We'll see what happens in 2026. Guys, if you've enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button, like the video, chuck down some banter, and can't wait. We'll have a few more All Blacks videos coming up shortly. Cheers.